guys, and welcome back to another episode of Draw with Tea. So in the last episode, I was doing some sketchbooking sketches of Humphrey, and I didn't actually like any of them. So when it came time to do his portrait, as I'm doing here, I basically just went into Photoshop and opened up a file and just went to town doing a sketch. Normally I actually don't sketch as rough as you see I'm doing here, but I was just kind of playing around with the idea of sketching rough. Because I have drawn Humphrey probably more than any other character that I've ever had or worked with ever. And so there's a certain amount of just muscle memory that comes every time I draw him. And especially in Photoshop, for some reason, drawing Humphrey digitally comes really naturally. And I think I chalk that up to having drawn literally thousands of panels of art with him in it in Photoshop. So I was actually quite pleased with myself being able to just whip up this sort of rough architecture and understand it immediately. But for the sake of inking, I decided to do kind of a more finished sketch layer, which is what I'm doing here. And this didn't really take me much time at all. I didn't have to speed this episode up by much in comparison to other characters I've done. And that's just simply because I've drawn Humphrey so much that it's kind of easy. And he is fun to draw. I do love drawing him. There are some instances where it is a bit tough, but something like this, all it is, it's just Humphrey being Humphrey. It's just I chose an expression that was endearing, but also kind of told you something about the character, and that's really all there is to it. You're gonna watch me basically sketch, ink, do the whole shabam. No real surprises here. Everything goes quite smoothly in comparison to when I was working on Yazette, or even Tristan to a lesser degree. Also, let me know if any of you guys have seen Humphrey's baggage previous to me doing Draw with Tea. I'm curious how many of my old hat kind of fans are around. I'm gonna guess probably not too many. I think most of everybody who knew Humphrey from my Humphrey's baggage days have not really seen this or aren't keeping up with this. But if you are one of them and you're watching this like 2 years in the future, still leave a comment. I will probably be confused AF as to what's going on and what you're referring to. But, that'll be an issue for future Tegan to deal with. As you saw here, I just basically fixed up the back of the head. That's probably the only real thing I adjust here. Maybe that eyebrow too. But not a whole lot needs to be adjusted before I jump into the ink here. This entire thing didn't take me long, and it actually surprised me because the last time I drew Humphrey, I wasn't really paying attention to how long it took me to sketch. That was something that happened kind of later and before I was really doing a lot of Humphrey free sketching. And here you see me kind of like experimenting in adding kind of a fringe, because I've been thinking, well, maybe Humphrey needs some kind of hair, maybe not. I'm not sure how young I want him to appear. He is probably the oldest character in the story, but he doesn't act like that at all, and that's mainly because dragons live for so long that really Humphrey is still quite a young dragon. I kind of envision him as being, maybe somewhere in his 30s, early 30s, if he was a human. Maybe even just a little younger than that. I mean, he has some experiences and some things, but when it comes to other, in comparison to other dragons, he is still very young, and, he definitely acts very young. People might mistake him for being naive and childlike and just really not knowing much about the world, but he's probably read. If there's any character in the world of Calasmere who could potentially have read every book in existence, it would be Humphrey. So he's knowledgeable, and he applies that knowledge. It's just that he believes in, peaceful approaches and hopes for the best in all people, and a lot of other characters see that as him being naive, especially in a setting where the main conflict is kind of this sort of could be war, or kind of a micro war, a guerrilla war between the heroes and your classic nasty bad guy that kind of wants to take over the kingdom. Well, he definitely wants to take over the kingdom, but possibly the world. But anyways, Humphrey's the kind of character that for one moment you might mistake him as just being naive and not someone worth talking to about the stakes at hand. But if, you're dealing with some crap, Humphrey is probably going to be the first person to sidle up beside you and give you some really, really top-tier good life advice that you either hadn't thought of or heard of, or you needed to hear in that moment to help you move on with things. That's just sort of the character he is. Now, I'm not incredibly impressed with my inking here. I think in the final it turns out all right, but there was just something about Humphrey's design that I did here that made it really hard to ink. It's easy to do sort of these sweeping gestural lines in the sketch, but when it comes to having to ink, especially digitally ink, long sweeping lines are my main weakness when it comes to digital inking. And that's just mainly because my angles are limited. I don't really know what angle I'm working at any time because I can't look down and see how my hand travels. I just have to hope that I can guess where my hand needs to go and translate that from a screen to where my hand actually is, which is on a Wacom pad in my lap. It's hard, and I really don't enjoy the process. I see artists working with iPads and Cintiqs, and I am very jealous because I know if I managed to get my hands on that, it would probably boost my productivity to a level that I would feel like an absolute idiot for not being able to get my hands on something like that sooner. But the reality of the situation is I'm just not rich enough for a Cintiq, and maybe not even rich enough for a Huon, although I'll have to research. Maybe Huon's a good brand. If any of you guys work with those Huon tablets, let me know if they're good. It's kind of a hard thing to get opinions on because a lot of people that have that have never worked with the Cintiq, so it might be good, but is it good enough? I'm finding it hard to find people that have intimately worked with like an Intuos and have moved on to something like a Huon. I find a lot of young people that have just bought a Huon because they're in that age bracket where their parents are able to afford that for them, or they save up their money for it. But I don't know too many people in my sort of age bracket, or really anybody, not even my age bracket, just any artist that has intimately worked with the Intuos and intimately worked with a Cintiq and intimately worked with a Huon or some combination therein to kind of help me with my purchasing decision, because I don't really have access to testing any of these devices. I just kind of have to buy them on faith, and it's a lot of money that I can sort of have, but then there's some other things I need to buy, and I gotta figure out what to buy first. But this Cintiq would be a very good investment for somebody like me, I'd have to say. But enough tech talk. I really hate talking about tech when I'm trying to do an art video. Let me know if you guys hate it too. Now we're moving on to color, and I'm just quickly adjusting the frame here to something a little longer and narrower. I grabbed that background file from Yazette, and originally I was going to use those colors because they're actually the same colors as the file you see on the left, which was the last time I drew Humphrey, which was, gosh, July. I can't believe it. It's been so long. And I'm just like Yazette and Tristan, I'm shading this really fast compared to how I normally do it. Normally, I add in the flat colors, and then, I set up special layers, at like 20% opacity, multiply, and then I'll take a very strange purple or something, and I'll just sort of use that to give the entire thing this sort of intricate coloring that I have a hard time doing just on my own. But since I already had the file on the left already done up, and this is just a quick portrait, I decided to just rip the colors right off and just have them at like on a normal layer, maybe lower the opacity, and just sort of go from there. Here I'm testing out what color I want the bridge of Humphrey's nose to look like. In the past, I've just kind of drawn 3 or 4 lines across his nose. Really, it's just for texturing, but here I tried taking it to the next level as sort of having them as scales, which Humphrey doesn't really have on the rest of his body, so I thought, well, maybe there'll be a pale color, maybe there'll be a dark color. Ultimately, I decided to just leave them as is. That's something future Tegan can figure out or fill in later. But since there's no other instance of that on his body, I just sort of left them as texturing once more, which he might not even need anymore, because I think the original purpose of those lines were to sort of help me understand the curvature of his nose, back when I was having a lot of trouble drawing muzzles. Now, these glasses are probably the hardest part that I encountered in this entire process, and that was just because I kept messing up what I wanted this sort of layer to be. Here I just basically made a layer over top even the inking, and what I wanted to do was just find a lighter color of the ink lines and just fill in the inks with that. What I didn't realize is I'd kind of messed up my opacities, and I thought couldn't figure out why my brush wasn't working, and it turned out it was because it was at a low opacity when I actually wanted it to be at 100%, but I wanted my layer to be at a low opacity. But anyways, Humphrey's glasses are probably the hardest thing to shade, and that's simply because I want that illusion of everything behind it fading a little, which involves working directly on the line work, or inking the glasses separately, which I didn't do in this case. I just went the fast route. And here I'm now shading the rest of Humphrey, and I thought about using the multiply layer. I may or may not have stuck with it, I can't quite remember, and I can't quite read the screen here. But once I kind of figured out the way I wanted to do things, it went super fast. So basically how I shaded Humphrey, and how I usually shade my figures, especially when I'm just going for something quick, is I just grab a big brush of whatever color I need, and I will block it in, and it'll be rough. The reason I do that is I tend to undershade otherwise, just because I'll pick at the little shadows and I'll get so soaked into the detail that I'll forget that the entire mass of, say, for example, the muzzle needs to be dark in that area, and then I'll end up having to do this anyways, because it seems to be the only way it works for me, is to kind of make a mess and then go in and clean up the mess. And it's in the nuances of how I clean up the quote-unquote mess that kind of creates the shading, as it were. Now, I'm actually really curious what you guys think of how I shade Humphrey here. I sort of do a mix of hard-edged lines and soft-edged lines, and I kind of keep thinking I need to do only hard-edged lines because that tends to be how cartoons are, and I come from an era where if you use the soft, basic Photoshop brush, then basically you're a inking pansy and or a coloring pansy, and you don't know what the heck you're doing, and you just need to get confident and at least use the hard edge brush or gradients or something. And that being said, I actually quite like the results here. Obviously there's some room to improve, but in terms of just, getting something out quick, I kind of like it, and I'm curious what you guys think of that sort of mix of some soft here, some hard there. Yeah, so let me know. And here you see me struggling with the highlighting. I was trying to find what layer style I needed, and this would have gone quicker if I just opened up the original Photoshop file of the images on the left and just grabbed that. I hadn't wanted to figure out the style or whatever, but I had to for this. And I think I found something pretty decent. So let me know which portrait you like of the 3 that I've done so far. Humphrey, Yzette, or Tristan. Anyways, with that, guys, as I change my signature here to the current date of when I did this, on the 27th, I'm going to say goodbye now. So like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't, and I hope to see you guys in the next episode. Bye!